better prices.
Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Tesvav in קידושין, as we learned for Shlema today for Baruch ben Ruth, who is being operated on today. So we're up to a little bit below the halfway point. Yesterday we started talking about Eved Ivri, and an Eved Ivri could be sold in one of several ways. Either he could sell himself if he's poor, and we said, according to the Tanakama, that's apparently the halacha. He could be sold for any period of time, be for 5 years, 10 years, whatever the deal was. Then you also have an Eved Ivri he's sold to if he sells himself to a guy. Then there's a mitzvah we'll see to redeem him, mitzvah on the part of his relatives. If he's able to afford it, he should redeem himself. If not, anybody can redeem him. We'll talk more in detail about that. Then there's an Eved who's sold, a Jewish, we're all talking about Jewish people, Eved Ivri, who's a full Jew. If he's sold by Bezdin, then he's sold, that's the beginning, that's Parsha in Shmos and in Dvarim, which talks about that he sold for 6 years, and if he wants to stay longer, he has to have his ear pierced, and he's called a Nirtza. So the question was, he sold, here we're talking about the Mishnah, says he sold for money or for a shtar. How do we know the money? So the money first talked about when he sold to a goy. How do we know that? There's talking about a goy. Mr. talking about he sold to a goy, but go sold to Avodah Zarah. Okay. How do we know by a Jew? From Behafte, by Amavriya, but maybe that's only by an Amavriya. Since a girl is married for money, maybe she could also be bought for money. So the pasuk says there's a hekesh between a manslave, an Eved Ivri, and Amavriya, so it relates to two. Okay. So that's fine if he was sold by Bezdin. That's what we're talking about in Shmos and in Dvarim. What happens if he's sold by himself? If he sells himself, so the Gemara says, "Suffer, suffer." You have Xer Shav. It says, "Suffer by both." By if he's Nimkar, sold by Bezdin, he's forcibly sold. There's Xer Shav. The Gemara says that's fine if you don't Xer Shav. If you don't Xer Shav, if you don't hold of Suffer, suffer. And apparently most of the rabbis do hold. If you don't do hold of it, if you don't hold of it, how do you know? Oh, so there, the Vayikra, where it talks about both selling yourself or selling yourself to a Jew or selling yourself to a guy, it says V'chi Sasig, if he's able to, if he's poor and he sells himself to a guy, so V'chi Sasig relates the first parsha where he talks about selling himself to the parsha of selling himself to another Jew versus selling himself to a guy. But we learned the upper version of what the upper parsha of selling himself on his own to a Jew from the lower parsha of selling himself to a guy, and there it's Mikesbet Nasa, so here also. So the Gemara says that's fine if you hold of Xer Shav. You don't have Xer Shav. How are you gonna? So if you don't hear, so we said, so you learn out from the Hekesh. Who is the author of the one who doesn't hold Xer Shav? So first we wanted to say it's the Tanakama who says that there are differences between a person who sells himself, many differences, versus sold by Bezdin. Sold by Bezdin, he gets a ma'anak when he goes out. Selling by Bezdin, he could be nirtza, etc., etc. Selling by Bezdin, he gets a shifra knanas, otherwise he can't. Rav Lezer didn't hold of that. So the Gemara wanted to say maybe the Tanakhama doesn't hold of sachar. The answer is no. It does hold of sachar, but each case is a special pasuk. So that's how Gemara came out. And this is where we're up to now. Elamantana, a little bit below, halfway down on the page on Tesvav Manaf. Elamantana leil sachar. Who is the one who doesn't hold of the Xer Shav of sachar? Telling you that you can learn out that it's sold, that whether he's sold by himself to, if he sells himself to a Jew, or if he sells him, or if he's sold by Bezdin, or sold if he sells himself to a guy. It says sachar in all these cases. So who's the one who doesn't hold of that? It says high time. It's the following time of the Tanya. V'shav al mishpachto. The pasuk says v'shav mishpachto. He goes back in Yovel. It goes back. What are we speaking about that parsha? It says v'shav al mishpachto comes to Yovel. He goes back. Who are we speaking about? Even Mocher, we're talking about sells himself to a Jew. We already had that. Rashi says, Mocher Atzmo Ksiv Lomer Shiur, he goes in Yovel. If it's Mocher himself, we already said, because it says in Shempog Yovel Tok Shav Yovel. It says before that it says Atshnas Yovel Yavonimach. So we already know. So what does this mean? B'shavel Mishpachto in Yovel he goes back. Who are we speaking about? The parsha is speaking about Mocher Atzmo. He sells himself to a Jew. It already says there. It already says Atshnas Yovel Yavonimach. He's going to work with you until Yovel. So we know that already. So what's this business? And Yovel will go back. We already said. It says before that, Atshnas Yovel Yavarimach. Ibn Nirtza. If we're talking about a person whose ear was pierced, in other words, he was sold, let's say, by Bezdin, and after 6 years he wanted to stay on, it already says that too. Where does it say that? Rashi says here, we're going to see where it says this. There it says, so another pasuk. We're speaking about if Bezdin sold him. Let's say Bezdin sold him 2-3 years. We talk about if Bezdin sells him in Shmos or in Dvarim, sells him, goes out after 6 years. If he wants to stay longer, Yovel. What happens if Yovel happens in the middle of the 6 years? That's what the pasuk is speaking about. El machru Bezdin shtam shosham Yovel. Yovel motzio. He goes out of Yovel no matter what. Okay, that's what it means for Shavah Mishpachto. So what do I need a pasuk for? If I learn out Sachar, Lamali, what do I need a pasuk to teach me that he goes out Sachar? Learn out that they're all related. Nirtza Machru Bezdin can be learned out from Mocher Atzma, just like Mocher Atzma goes out in Yovel, so does Machru Bezdin if he holds it as Sachar. Elamai must be, this is the Tana who doesn't hold of Sachar, because he has one pasuk for Mocher Atzma, he has another pasuk for Nirtza, and he has another pasuk for Machru Bezdin. That in all these cases he goes out in Yovel. So it must be that this is the Tana. It's like no proof. Just like we said yesterday, you can't prove that the Tana Kama of Rav Lezer holds that, because in each case it's a special pasuk. He does hold the Xavier Shabbat. Still, I need to tell me that if he didn't work 6 years, and you sold by Bezdin didn't work 6 years, he still goes out in Yovel if Yovel happened to come in the middle of the 6 years. I think Mocher Atzma who love Isura. Mocher Atzma didn't do any Isura. Why does Bezdin sell him? Because he stole and he couldn't pay it back, so Bezdin forcibly sold him. But if he sells himself just out of poverty, he didn't do an Isur. There maybe he goes out in Yovel, even if Yovel hit, sometime in the middle. He sold himself for X number of years and Yovel came in front, he goes out. Machru Bezdin nobody saw. He did an Isur. He stole. Aminik to say, I might think here he should go out. In other words, even though there is a Xavier Shavah between Sachar relating Mocher Atzmo to Machru Bezdin, so they should have the same halachas, but not all the same halachas as we saw. They're not the same with Shifra Knadas, not the same with Ma'anak, etc. All these differences that we said yesterday, they apply. Why? Because there's a special pasuk. Machru Bezdin, I might think, since he did an Isser, okay, the Sachar maybe is to tell me about the money, that he could be sold for money. But I might think that even though they are similar, but over here, since he stole, he should serve his full 6-year term, right? You go to jail, like he's put in servitude here as a punishment for stealing. He should stay the whole 6 years. Kamash one that he doesn't. Amar Mar. So we said before, if it's Mocher Atzmo that he goes out and at Yovel, we already have a pasuk Babatcha Ad Shasa Yovel, right? Ad Shasa Yimach, right? Ad Shasa Yovel Yaval Imach. Even near Tzarek Varmer. Where does it say it by near? It's a Ma'i the Tanya. Another pasuk there. V'shaftem isha l'chuzasa. We have a Shavah Mishpachto, right? That's speaking about. We said Machru Bezdin 2-3 years before. Now we have a pasuk of Shavah isha l'chuzasa. The isha Mishpachto. Because what are we speaking about? Even Mocher Atzma. We already said we have a pasuk. The first pasuk we quoted of Varat Shnasa Yovel Yavan Imach. Even Machru Bezdin, if Bezdin sold him, we just proved. What's the case where Bezdin sold him and Yovel happened upon him in the middle of the 6 years? That's the pasuk of a Shav El Mishpachto, right? We're talking about if he was nirtza, if he was pierced, and then 2 years Yovel, his ears was pierced 2-3 years before Yovel, Shah Yovel Motzio, that he goes out in Yovel. That's what we speak about. That a nirtza, how long does he serve? Till Yovel, like we all learn in grade school, right? If his ear is pierced, he stays till Yovel. Even if it's near to 2-3 years before Yovel, he goes on Yovel.
So we don't learn the old
very good. We're going to come to that. My mashma. How do you see this in the words? It says, "V'shaftem isha l'chuzasa v'isha mishpachto toshuvu in Yovel." What are we speaking about there? Isha chuzasa v'isha mishpachto. How do you know we're talking about nirtza? Amarav barshila makrot pasuk ish. A man, what applies to a man and not to a woman? As we said yesterday, but us no. You only pierce a man's ears if he wants to stay longer. If an Amavriya, she sold it by her father at the age of 3, and now she's turning 9. So she served her 6 years, but she wants to stay on. No, you don't do it, but you don't do it to a girl, only to a man. So everything else, on a chuzah, a woman can have a property also. She can have an inheritance that goes back, etc. But what's the vishal mishpachta? What applies to a man, not to a woman? That's ritziyah. So why do I have to tell me that both the Bezdin sold him and he goes out of Yovel? Or if he was pierced, both cases, Nirsa is also Machru Bezdin, right? Machru Bezdin is if Bezdin sold him and within 6 years, Yovel happens, goes out. Or if he was Nirza and Yovel happened a few years later, he also goes out. What if them both? Machru Bezdin, Mishum de Lamata Zimne. The chiddush over there is he hasn't served 6 years, so you might think, why should he go out? He hasn't done his basic time, right? Aval Nirza the Matazimne. Nirza, he already did his 6 years, right? He's doing extra now. He stayed on, so you might think, okay, Ema Niknase. He said, listen, there he didn't do his the first case he didn't do his 6 years. Okay, so he didn't do his 6 years. Not this far. I just say, since he didn't do 6 years yet, he hasn't requested to stay longer. In other words, it's really an aveira to stay a slave, because the pasuk says, Hashem said, "You're my servants. You shouldn't be servants to some other people. You shouldn't be a slave." So, if you tell me the case of Machu Bezdin, Mishum Delamata Zimne, okay, I understand why he goes on Yovel. He hasn't done anything other than stealing, which put him into the servitude in the first place. But he hasn't requested to stay on, so maybe he goes out in Yovel. I will near to the Mata Zimne. He served the 6 years. Why does he want to stay longer? He shouldn't be a slave. He should be a slave to Hashem, not to another person. Amen. Nick to say we should fine him, and he shouldn't even go out in Yovel. That's what I might think. He goes out in Yovel. Because he's already served, at least he served the 6 years. So now he goes out in Yovel. He hasn't done his 6 years yet. His minimum term below. And as you can see it both ways. That's why you need to tell me that whether he was sold by Bezdin and he's in the middle of his first 6 years, or whether he stayed on after becoming a Nirza, either way he goes out in Yovel, whenever Yovel happens, either the middle of 6 years or after 6 years. That's what you need both. So now we say, what is Shaftem speaking about? A Nirza goes out. Okay, he goes out in Yovel. Why does it have to say La'olam? Where does it say La'olam, Michael? In Shmos, Bavado, Le'olam, right? Because Rahman La'olam, we don't see La'olam, Havimina, La'olam Mamish. He stays forever. Maybe if he's a Nirza, he serves 6 years, want to stay on, he stays on Adnei Vesserman for his whole life. Because Rahman B'Shaftim, no. Everybody goes back to their family in Yovel, even the Nirza. That's what it says B'Shaftim. So telling that Lolam is not Mamish because of Rahman B'Shaftim, don't say B'Shaftim. When does he go back? If he hasn't done 6 years, if he hasn't. So in other words, when does he go back in Yovel? When he hasn't done 6 years yet. Meaning, he says V'Shaftim, he goes back in Yovel. When does he go back in Yovel? If he hasn't done 6 more years after he was Nirza. But let's say he was Nirza and Yovel was 10 years away, right? 10 years away. So he was Nirza in the 40th year of Yovel. Then he served 6 years until the 46th year of Yovel. And I might think when he had 6 already, so his later sentence shouldn't be greater than the first sentence. He was first sentenced for 6 years, right? That was the deal, right? After 6 years, it was 10 years away from Yovel. He says, I'd like to stay on. So what's the rule? The rule is he stays on until Yovel, right? After he's Nirza. But you might think maybe he should only stay another 6 years. That's it, right? If it would only say V'Shaftem, so when does he go back? He goes back if the second period, what do you call that? The second sentence or the second extension, the extension hasn't been 6 years, then he goes back. He's already done 6 years. He should go out after 6 years. He stays on all the way till Yovel. Lolam means Yovel, right? But if I only say Lolam, I think maybe he means forever until 120, his whole life, right? No, he goes back in Yovel. But if I only say Yovel, maybe he goes back. If what? If he hasn't done the extra 6 years yet. He's done 6 years and he hasn't done another 6 years. But then he goes back in Yovel. But if he already's done a second 6 years, that's enough. Maybe that's what no, he stays on until Yovel. Well, he stays on to the forever of Yovel. So we said already now. So it's not the Tanakam of Rav Lezer we said yesterday, and it's not this sheet to also Rav Lezer when Medaber doesn't talk about this. It's not Sacher here. You might say, what do he need? If he owes a Sacher, he doesn't need extra shikkum. No, he owes a Sacher, but I might think we give him a fine. So who is it? Who's the one who doesn't want Sacher? Maybe it's Rebbe. What's Rebbe? The Tanya. Here we're going to talk about in Vayikra talks about if he sells himself to a guy. It says Bim lo yigu ba'elu. What if the pasuk? The pasuk says if he sells himself to a guy or to a avodah zarah, his family should redeem him. Ododo or Ben Dodo, it says Yigalenu, right? He's Siga Yodo, or if he can raise some money himself. In other words, it's a mitzvah for his family to redeem him. That's the point if he sells himself to Goy. If he sells himself to a Jew, it's not a mitzvah for his family to redeem him. Might be a nice thing, but the family might like if he's over there, but it depends on your family, right? But here, when he sells to a Goy, it's a mitzvah to get him out of there because the Goy is going to prevent him from doing mitzvahs. Now, we're talking about here, Moshe, you brought this up the other day. We're talking about over here where the Goy is under Jewish jurisdiction. If you're under the Roman jurisdiction or the Babylonian jurisdiction, we can't tell, we can tell the Goy all we want. He doesn't have to listen to us, right? We're talking about where we're under Jewish jurisdiction, but still we follow rules that he's got to be redeemed. So it says over there, the pasuk we sell no Goy, his family will redeem him or himself, or as we'll see, acher. Vinigo teaches us, or anybody can redeem him. We'll see differences soon. Okay, but Rebbe says like this: if he's not redeemed by one of these three kinds of people, so Rebbe Omer be'elu nigel be'enu shesh doesn't go out in 6 years. In other words, even though he's selling to a Goy, and we're talking about under our jurisdiction, he doesn't go out 6 years. Is only if Bezdin sells him, right? There's 6 years. If he sells himself, he can sell himself for 6 years too, but he can sell himself for 10 years or 15 years. But if he was sold to a Goy, he doesn't go out 6 years. Shochem might think below dinu. Listen to this. Somebody who's not redeemed by his relatives, like a regular slave, not a slave sold to a Goy, sold to a Jew. It goes out 6 years. He should also go out 6 years automatically. Shesh means he goes out with years automatically if he serves 6 years. If he sold to a Goy, his family or himself or other people should redeem him. That's the mitzvah. But he doesn't go out 6 years automatically. But if you tell me it's Sacher, why does it say somebody who's not nigel by relatives, let's say, by the relatives? The nigel b'sheish, this one who's nigel should certainly be nigel b'sheish. Why do you say ma mi she'eino nigel ba'ela? If you're sold to a Goy, you're redeemed by your relatives, and we learn out Sacher by the Goy also says Sacher. It says it even a couple of times. Rashi says over here by Abu Kham also, right, where the lines get narrow because Sacher shana b'shana ya imo. So if you're sold to a Jew, you should also go out by the relatives. Also have a mitzvah to redeem you, and they can redeem you. My comer mami she'eino nigel ba'ela neiluf Sacher should say Sacher, and everybody's not that. Elamai must be the Rebbe doesn't hold of Sacher. So the second more is the same thing. No, just like we said about the Tanakama, and just like we said about Yaakov, he does hold the Sacher. And you really should be able to shiny hacha, but over here it's different because here, when it comes to being redeemed from a Goy, it says v'shiny hacha damarko yigalenu. He should be redeemed. When do the relatives an obligation, or any other Jew has an obligation to redeem him? If he sold to this guy, Yigalenu, this guy who sold to a Goy, but not somebody else. Okay, so therefore. We don't have anybody. We're still looking for somebody who doesn't hold the Sacher. We didn't come out finding person Sacher. We could say it's possible to say that he doesn't hold Sacher. It's also possible to say, just like we said before, he holds of Sacher. But here it's different because we got a pasuk or a different svar. Now we said over here that we're saying clearly that who doesn't go if you're sold to a Goy, you don't go out in 6 years, right? If you sell to a Goy by Bez, if you sell to a Jew, Bezin only sells you to a Jew, and then the rule is 6 years. If you sell yourself, you could also be sold for 6 years, whatever the deal was. But if you're sold to a Goy, you don't go out in 6 years. That's Rebbe's opinion. Who's the one who argues? Mantana the Polyglot of Yossi Aglili Rabbi Kiva. Mantana the Polyglot Rebbe. Who argues with Rebbe? Rabbi Yossi Aglili Rabbi Kiva. They both argue with Rebbe, and they hold they do go out in 6 years. The Tanya, lo yigal ba'ela says lo yigal if you're not redeemed by these relatives. Yossi Aglili, they learned the pasuk differently. Rebbe said if you're not redeemed by Ela with these, in other words, with your relatives, you're only redeemed for relatives. You don't go to Sheish. They don't learn that Ela for that. He says if you're sold to a Goy, you could also go out. You also go out in 6 years. But he learns that Ela this means lo yigal ba'ela. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer ba'ela l'shichur b'shar kolot b'shibud. Ba'ela means if you're not redeemed by Ba'ela, meaning if you're redeemed by your relatives, you go out free. If your relatives buy you out, and what do they pay for you? Whatever the remaining money is, right? If you're sold for up to 6 years, let's say for 100 hours, and you work 3 years, you owe him $50 and you get him out free. He goes out free. B'shar kol adam, if anybody else redeemed you, you become their slave. B'shar kol adam l'shibud. That's how Rabbi Yosef Lila learns it. In other words, the Eila is not like we said before that these can redeem you. These are the only way to redeem you, but you're not redeemed by 6 years. That was Rebbe's idea, that only relatives can redeem you. 6 years doesn't redeem you. Rabbi Yosef Lila says, no, 6 years redeems you, just like Sachar. 6 years redeems you, whether you're sold, whether Besson sold you, or whether you sold to go, you go out in 6 years. Eila teach me something else. How are you redeemed? The Tanya Legal Baila, Rabbi Yosef Lila, if your family redeems you, then you're redeemed. Legal Baila. If somebody else redeems you, you belong to them.
For the prorated time?
For the prorated time. No, is that there's right for the prorated time until 6 years or until Yovel, as we'll see. Right? B'shar kol adam l'shibud. Rabbi Kiva says the other way around. Kiva says be'elu l'shibud. If your family redeems you, you work for them. That's the worst servitude. You work for your family. Yeah, that's it. Be'elu l'shibud. If your family redeems you, you work for them until you go out. B'shar kol adam l'shibud. Anybody else, if anybody else redeems you, you're free. Now, why is it? What's the basis of this? Now, my time Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, if you're not redeemed by your relatives, but rather by somebody else, then b'yatsa b'shasa yovel. Then it says he goes out in yovel. It goes out in yovel, meaning if your family redeems you, fine. But if, in other words, they can hold of it's mashma. The Gemara doesn't say it explicitly, but the Gemara said Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Mapik Havel Brashachminem, they hold that a mochel goes out in 6 years. Okay, so he goes out in 6 years. If he doesn't go out in 6 years, when does he go out? In Yovel, but he works for the other guy, the guy who redeemed him. Basically, he says if he's not redeemed by his relatives, which means he's redeemed and he's out free, they paid his way out and he's out free. Ela ba'acher, then the Yatzvashasi Yovel. Rabbi Kiva says no. Im lo yigo ela ba'ela. When does he go out in Yovel? If he's redeemed by his relatives. If he's only redeemed by his relatives, then he only goes out in Yovel, meaning he stays in servitude to his relatives. But if he's redeemed by somebody else, he goes out free right away. So Rabbi Yosef Glili says to him, or someone says to Rabbi Kiva, how could he say that? If somebody else redeems you, you go out free. If your family redeems you, you work for them. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef, he's asking to Rabbi Kiva, Midi Ela Ba'elixib. What is that? How are you reading the pasuk? It says, in lo yigo Ela Ba'ela, if you're only redeemed by your relatives, then you got to work till Yovel. If you're redeemed by somebody else, okay. Does it say Ela Ba'ela? It doesn't say that. Right? Midi Ela Ba'elixib, Ela Ba'ikra. So we say, no. Machlokes Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Kiva is based on something else. It says like this, O Dodo, O Ben Dodo, your uncle, your relative, your cousin, whatever you go out will redeem you. Zegelos Krovim. That's a mitzvah. Oisi Giyara, or if you can afford it, Masik Yah, before you raise some money yourself, Zegelos Atzmo. The nigo, the end of the pasuk, the last word of the pasuk, the nigo, Zugal Esachem, somebody else gave. Somebody else redeemed you. How did they Yashua? Basically, Savar, Mikdash Lefana. So first it talks about relatives, then it talks about yourself, then it talks about other people. So Rabbi Yossi Glili says you learn from the beginning of the pasuk. The beginning of the pasuk talks about relatives. Relate that to the middle. The middle talks about redeeming yourself. So from Mikdash Lefana. When you redeem yourself, of course you're going out free. Who are you redeeming yourself from? Let's say you raise the money yourself. You paid off the guy for the remaining years, and you go out free, right? So you're free. Obviously, redeeming yourself means you go out free. Who are you working for? Yourself, right? So do you relate that to the beginning of the pasuk that talks about relatives, which means just like if you redeem yourself, you're free. If your relatives redeem you, you're totally free. Or you relate it to the end of the pasuk. If somebody else redeems you, then you're free. But if your family redeems you, you work for them. So that's the machlokas here. You relate the middle to the beginning. Shadi gulas krov with my gulas atzmo. Gulas krov in the beginning pasuk is like gulas atzmo. My gulas atzmo is shikra. Obviously, you're freeing yourself. Gulas krov l'shrachim. Rabbi Kiva savar mikdash la'achrav. No, you look at it towards the end of the pasuk. Shadi gulas acher my gulas atzmo. If somebody else redeems you, it's like redeeming yourself. My gulas atzmo is shikra. Gulas acher is also free. But if your relatives redeem you, you work for them. But this is the problem. What do you need Be'ela for? What is Be'ela? The whole idea was Be'ela, this and that. You don't need Be'ela. If you're saying it's based on, put the middle part that talks about redeeming yourself, does it relate to the beginning of the pasuk at the end of it? What do you need Be'ela for? Zila, Be'ela, if it wouldn't be for Eila, I would say that either way, whether your relatives redeem you or somebody else redeems you, it's just like if you redeem yourself and you go out free. Either way, it's going to shecher. So what does Be'ela teach me for? If it wouldn't be for Eila, I would say it works both ways. So Eila tells me which way. Okay, but again, we're back to if you need Be'ela to teach me that it's only one or the other. So it doesn't say Ela Be'ela. We're back to the first question we asked on Rabbi Kiva. It doesn't. Rabbi Kiva says him, "Lo, you go Ela Be'ela." It doesn't say Ela Be'ela. It says Be'ela. So we're back to our kasha. Why does Rabbi Kiva? How does Rabbi Kiva know that if your relatives you redeem you have to work for them? Just if it wouldn't be Be'ela tells you, it only works one way. Your relatives and somebody else redeeming you are different. Some this way, some. How do you know which one? How does Rabbi Kiva know that it's that it's the relatives that you have to work for and not the other people? Logical Chor would tell you if your relatives redeem you, they want you to go out free. Somebody else redeems you, you work for them because it's not, they're not. Why are they responsible to redeem you? Your relatives, okay, you have there's something about family here, But if somebody else redeems you, the logic should be they should be you should work for them. But if your relatives redeem you, you should be free. Where does Rabbi Kiva get this from? It doesn't say Ela Be'ela. Ela B'Sparkim. You know what the machlokes is very simple. If Yossi Savar, Misnavar Gula Sacher L'Shibud. Probably if somebody else redeems you, there you have to work for them. Diamar L'Shechar, if they're going to free, but why should somebody else redeem you? You sold yourself to a guy. Whenever you're in poverty, you sold yourself to a guy. Somebody else has to redeem you. Go ask your relatives for money, right? If somebody comes to borrow money from you, he's got a millionaire brother. You're gonna say, "What are you coming to me for?" Go to him. You got a brother there, right? So why should they redeem you? The answer is that therefore the pasuk says, you know what? If somebody else redeems you, you have to work for them because they're effectively buying your service contract. That's what they're doing effectively. It's a redemption from the guy, but he's got to work for you, right? They're buying your service contract. They're buying the contract from the guy. That's a mitzvah to do. So you shouldn't have to work for the guy because under the guy it'll be hard to do mitzvahs. Fine. If your relatives redeem you, probably you should work for them, not if somebody else redeems you. Why? If you're always going to go out free, call Yomי. The guy's got a rich brother. He's going to say, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to sell myself to a guy. He has to redeem me. My rich brother has to redeem me." So, and he'll sell himself again and again and again because the guy's got to pay his way out. So he'll sell himself to a guy to raise some money, and then his brother will have to redeem him. So therefore, we say, you know what? If your brother redeems you, you got to work for him. That's really bad. That's worse sometimes than working for the guy, right? So if you down with the shikha, call you nafshay. Therefore, it's logical to say that if somebody else redeems you, you go out free. If your brother redeems you, you have to work for them. That's the machlokes of Yosef. But Rav Shapiro and Rabbi Kiva both hold that if you work for a guy, you do go out in 6 years. But Rebbe said you don't go out in 6 years. You're only redeemed by if somebody redeems you, yourself or relatives or somebody else, but not in 6 years. And Rabbi Kiva and Rav Shapiro presumably they hold of sacher. So you go out in 6 years based on sacher, and they use Be'ela for this drasha that we've just described, or it's based on different svaras, not necessarily Be'ela, but not on Be'ela for this, but to tell me that it's Be'ela means some of them, right? Be'ela means your relatives or the other people. We don't know which one. What's it based on? What's the nafkamina based on? Based on svara, not from Ela Be'ela, but rather it's either your relatives or somebody else that you're going to go out free, and the other one you're not going to go out free. Which one's which? Based on these svaras. These are the words of Yosef and Rabbi Kiva will hold that way. The Chachamim, and we'll see that's Mancham Rebbe, that's Rebbe, he holds no, either way. Whoever redeems you, you go out free. You go out free whether you redeem yourself, which is obvious, if your relatives redeem you from the guy, or if somebody else redeems you, or a stranger, either way you go out totally free. Man Chachamim, that's Rebbe. Why? As we said at the top of the page. Rebbe uses a different Russia entirely. That the tifla you only nigel by people redeeming you and not by 6 years. That's Rebbe's Russia. Basically, Rebbe says no. You go out 6 years, presumed from sacher. You go out 6 years. Everybody, just like if Besson sells you, go out in 6 years. You go out in 6 years. So that's what they hold. But the machlokas is simply they hold that there's a difference if somebody else redeems you or your relatives in terms of whether you work for them or you're totally free. But presumably you go like Rebbe, that whoever redeems you, you go out totally free. The pasuk is whether you redeem yourself, but just like you redeem yourself, you go out free. The prior words of Ben Dodo Dodo or Ben Dodo, your relatives, you also go out totally free. Or whether somebody else nigal, whether somebody else redeems you, also go out totally free. The Rebbe Hai Biyatza B'Shas Yovel Mayovel. So according to Rebbe, what does he do B'Yatza B'Shas Yovel? If the way to redeem you is only if relatives redeem you, and you don't go out in 6 years, according to Rebbe. If you work for a guy, you don't go out in 6 years. So what does B'Yatza B'Shas Yovel go? It's only B'Yatza B'Shas Mayovel. What do you do with that? Mi boy lay these for this was like Tanya B'Yatza B'Shas Yovel. We're speaking about a guy who again is under Jewish jurisdiction. He has to follow our Jewish rules. Maybe it's talking about a guy who's not under your rules. He's under Roman rule. If he's under Roman rules, how can you tell him what to do? I can say, well, it's Yovel, time to go out free. We're talking about a guy who's under your jurisdiction. And the Chiddush is just like Rashi explains. I'm reading the last couple words of like a couple lines on Rashi and Amid Beis. If relatives don't redeem him, not his relatives, not anybody else, not himself, he's got to work until Yovel. You can't come with force and tell him, you're under our jurisdiction. Hey, this Jew sold himself to you. You got to let him stay till Yovel. That's the point. If he sold himself to a guy, according to Rebbe, he doesn't go out in 6 years. Anybody should redeem. That's the mitzvah. His family, himself, or somebody else should redeem him. And if he redeems him, he goes out free. But if they don't redeem him, he's got to stay till Yovel. You can't say, there's a Jew working for you. We got, rules. It's haflaya. It's racism. You know what I mean? That when you work for us, you stay forever. But but here we can get you out whenever you want. No, he's got to stay till Yovel. That's the rule. He only goes out in Yovel and not before. All right, we'll pick it up here from the 2 dots, 5 lines down on the page tomorrow on Daf Sunday. Have a good day.
Oh, yeah, beautiful. Thank you.